Hello, everyone. This is George de Bourguignon. I'm president of the CBS Alumni Club here in Chile. And on behalf of the Alumni Club and the Colombia Global Center of Santiago, we want to welcome you all to a new series of our event, of our series of webinars that we've been organizing this year. And in this opportunity, we have Professor Todd Jick to talk to us about leadership and the pandemic, rising to the occasion. The idea of this event is to listen a presentation of Professor Jick, and then we will have an open Q&A that will be moderated by our fellow alumni, Juan Jose Silva, who has very recently moved back to Chile after having been living in the United States. We want to welcome you all for participating in this event. We welcome all your comments and we invite you to use the virtual tools to do the Q&A or participate in the event. We want to make a special welcoming to the Alumni Club, CBS Alumni Club from Peru, who have also been participating in this opportunity, as well as our fellow MIT alumni members from Chile. I don't want to take much more time, so thank you everyone for joining us, and I will leave the floor for Juan Jose.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce Professor Todd Jick. Professor Jick has been a professor of management at Columbia Business School since 2006 and a leading expert in leadership and organizational change. He has had a long career of both academic and consulting work in this field. His book, Managing Change, has been the leading offering in the organizational change field for the last 15 years. He has a master's and a PhD from Cornell in organizational behavior, and he has been a professor for 10 years in Harvard Business School and also a visiting professor in Europe at INSEAD and London Business School. Professor Jick is also president of Global Leadership Services, Inc., a consulting firm specializing in leadership and executive development support. Aside from his outstanding professional achievements, he stands out as a down-to-earth professor with a close connection with his students. He's a two-time winner of Columbia's prestigious Singby Prize, which is awarded by students to faculty members that exemplify excellence in the classroom. His courses, Organizational Change and Advanced Organizational Change, are among the most popular and have attracted thousands of students over the years. So their focus on managing planned and unplanned change and how to cope with change remain timeless. And I can speak about this firsthand because I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to have both courses with Professor Jick, so I know what I'm talking about. Professor Jick, thank you very much for joining us today and accepting our invitation. As you know, Chile has been living very volatile and uncertain times since last year. We first started with the social unrest after October. Now we have an ongoing constitutional process. And moreover, we have to deal with COVID-19 and all these challenges. So this is a very relevant topic. Organizational change is very important for us today. And the best proof of this is that right now we have almost 60 people joining this webinar. I'm looking forward to your talk. So no more to say. I have spoken enough, and I'll leave you with Professor Todd Jick.
Oh, Juan Jose, that is such a generous introduction. Thank you very much, George. Thank you for your kind words. It's nice to see both of you. And I guess what you're saying, Juan Jose, in part is that misery loves company is the expression. So what Chile has been going through, and I presume Peru as well, and other parts of South America is not something that any of us have enjoyed, and certainly not in the United States. So we share this misery together. Let me thank everyone who is on this Zoom call to appreciate the time that you're taking to spend with me, and everyone associated with Columbia. If you're a graduate, we welcome you back. If you're associated in other ways, we thank you. And if you're not associated, we appreciate your ability to kind of join with us today as well. Some of you may know that the Columbia Business School has a tagline, a piece of kind of advertising with its name that is called "At the Very Center of Business." Columbia Business School at the very center of business. By the way, behind me is the very center of Columbia University on graduation day, but not this past May, the previous May, because we didn't fill the center of Columbia University with people in May. And those graduating seniors who were undergrads or second years who were business school students all did it virtually. So it's a little nostalgia to put up this, this picture behind me. In any case, I'm saying that we were described as at the very center of business. Unfortunately, at least temporarily, we took a little detour and we've become at the very center of the pandemic. And that is not a formal advertising line. By the way, I'm happy to see faces. I see a lot of you without faces, and I know some of you could be in places where you can't put them up, but I'm happy to see faces if you're willing to do that. I'll go to slides in a minute, and I won't see that many of you along the way, but I'd love to see, and any graduates, I'm very happy to see you. In any case, all of my talks, in a way, have been renamed as a result of at the very center of the pandemic, something, and the pandemic, because we are all consumed with this. And what I'm going to share with you today is really these last 5 months of observation, research, some data collection, and certainly some observation about what companies have been going through and what is sort of the leadership challenge associated with that. Obviously, it's a terrible tragedy on a global basis. And so there are many aspects of this that we can talk about. And the fact that I was asked to speak today about this presumes that you're interested in this because of what's been happening in your experience. But what we're going to do is share the question of how businesses, can cope with this. And if you permit me here a second, I will bring my slides up. I want to say, are my slides visible at this point? They are. All right. So what we're going to do is sort of talk about this leadership and the pandemic. And I want to kind of position this by saying we've all gone through all sorts of things. I taught all spring in that very setting with my Columbia Business School tie on. And that's not how I like to teach. I'm a high touch guy, and I ended up being in a high tech situation, and I've been there ever since. And I was 10 weeks not even leaving my apartment in New York City, even to go outside. So I understand you're now in the first week of minimally beginning to resume your some aspect of regular life. But as we all know, we don't know when we're gonna get any further in that. So I'm very happy to see you as we can on Zoom, but I'm really speaking about this phenomenon of we've had to make adjustments, all of us. And what have leaders had to do in that respect is what I want to talk about this morning. And I want to talk about this really in 3 parts, and I'm not going to I'm planning on a half hour here to just fill out this story and then open it up for Q&A and observations and commentary. I may ask you to comment along the way, but for the moment, I just want to position this as a piece of a concept I was talking about for the last 3 or 4 years called VUCA, and I'll explain what that word means if you don't know it. But it is in a crazy world, in an unpredictable world is what that's about, and what it means to lead in a highly unpredictable world. Because Juan Jose just said, I'm an expert in planned change. I've had to become an expert in unplanned change. That's a different domain. Second of all, much of the change, certainly not all of it, but much of it has involved downsizing and layoffs and other kinds of very difficult decisions and actions. And I want to talk about leaders in that moment, as well as leaders helping their companies to recover, not only to survive, but to recover. And finally, then to say what is sort of at least what I hope to be a set of best practices or directions for the future to make things better coming out of this horrible period. So 3 parts to my session, and I hope you'll find them each stimulating. I would normally begin a session on leadership. This is not leadership in the pandemic, but if I just said leadership, I would give a definition. And I worked with a CEO some years ago, and he used this description: leaders take organizations to places they would otherwise not have gone to. They would not otherwise have gone to. By the way, if I stumble in my English, suffice it to say, all of you as Spanish speakers, I'm apologizing for the fact that I'm speaking in my language while the rest of you are translating. That puts a much bigger burden on you, and I thank you for taking in this session, not in your native language, and allowing me to do this. But I definitely could not do this in Spanish, so we're better off in English. So what this means is, back to sort of the planful change, that leadership is about a legacy of being able to add value by taking an organization to a place that its own inertia would not have taken it on its own. And organizations are filled with inertia. And that's sort of the construct of the big L leader, somebody that can set a vision, set a direction, mobilize commitment and motivation, and take their organization to a new place. That seems to be a leader at the controls, a leader in the driver's seat. And what the VUCA world means is a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity is what those four letters mean, VUCA. And what it's obviously meaning is that it is a series of forces and challenges that are not something that's planned, that are not something that is controlled, and that is part and parcel of the way in which the world has been moving anyway, be it technology changes, be it regulatory changes, be it environmental changes, many other kinds of things that are beyond the control of a leader, but the leader is impacted by them. I think what we're going through now, and what I want to sort of put as a proposition, is VUCA cubed. What that means is VUCA times 2 or 3. It's much more intensely VUCA. And the playbook that I would set out for executives and leaders for the traditional VUCA world, which is no easy traditional world, it's still a kind of new element, doesn't entirely apply to what we're now seeing with this pandemic, which has really shaken every bit of our assumptions and our approaches. So I'm characterizing it as no ordinary disruptions. There are many kinds of disruptions. This is not an ordinary one. And as much as I've been called today to be an expert on this, it's hard not to be humble by the fact that we don't have a playbook for this. We are putting this together as we speak, and I'm offering some thoughts, mostly based upon what I'm observing as what I consider to be good practice versus bad practice, not something that I can give you research evidence over 10 years of examination and say, I know this is the right way and this is the wrong way. So I want to suggest in a way that we co-develop this topic today about leadership and the pandemic based upon your experience and mine, and we together try and fashion what's it going to take to manage through this particular challenge, and then learn from that for the future of other potential challenges, because the VUCA concept is that it's nonstop. It's nonstop. There are all sorts of things that will come at us that we need to be able to deal with. But wow, have we got ourselves a challenge today. And I found this image last night and added it to the slide because I don't know how the rest of you feel. And I read your impressive backgrounds and positions you're holding, but what a period of time it has been personally, of course, all of you and me dealing with changes in our personal lives, but professionally to deal with all of these issues. There you were dealing with whatever issues Chile was facing and Peru was facing in February, which I'm sure was substantial as it was in the United States. And then all of this came at us. The pandemic, the collapse of the economy, the question about, do we really have leaders in government that are able to help us lead through this at a federal level? The various social unrest issues that I understand you've been facing and that the United States recently encountered so dramatically and sadly. And I added education, and just to be selfish. I mean, again, I've been, Juan Jose was sort of implying this, I've been teaching for over 40 years. And I learned to teach the case method at Harvard Business School, and I was very proud of that. I spent the last basically 15 years at Columbia, and so proud to have done my work at Columbia, and thought, okay, now I'm going to kind of just sail into the sunset with everything I've learned. And when I was told by the dean on March 12th that you're teaching online, my friend, on March 22nd, and I had been resisting online teaching for the last 5 or 8 years of my professional life, saying, I'm too old, it's too late, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And now what I'm doing is I'm actually leading tutorials of faculty about how to teach on Zoom. The old dog has not only learned the new tricks, I'm saying this with due lack of humility, but I'm even teaching it to other people. And I never prepared for this. I never planned for this. I'm just giving you that selfish bullet. I can tell you about clients that I'm dealing with that are dealing with all of these other issues, and all of you dealing with these issues. And I'm impressed with everyone's ability to stand up at all through this, because it's a lot that's been thrown at us. It's a lot that's been thrown at us. And I add the last bullet about meeting the needs of multiple stakeholders, because I assume, I'll come to that in a second, but I assume you've seen what the Business Roundtable in the United States put together at the end of December last year. I'll come to that in a second, but it's a whole notion of you must pay attention to many different parties and interests called stakeholders if you want to be successful as a leader, not just the shareholders, not just the investors. And that's an important distinction I'll come to in a second. My conclusion of this opening section is to say I'm going to change this statement now about leadership. Crises take leaders to places they would not otherwise have gone to. Crises now are taking leaders to places they wouldn't have gone to, didn't plan to go to, and may not want to go to, but have to go to. And that's now the challenge of leadership and the pandemic, which is how do you deal with things that are out of your control, and which have, again, all of these different stakeholders saying, you better do it right. You better do it right by me, the customer. You better do it right by me, the government. You better do it right by the communities where you're located. And of course, investors and employees. And I'm going to spend the rest of my presentation essentially focusing on only one of these interests, which is employees, but they're all in this. And the complications of addressing all of these interests are substantial, because even among employees, there are a lot of elements there, as you see in my slide. I mean, it's a question of, well, what's going to be their comp and benefits, during this period? Are they working? George, we were talking before the session about, are they furloughed? Are they laid off? So furloughs are different than layoffs. They still get benefits. So what is the way in which you structure your obligations to your employees while your business is going through a significant downturn? And if you simply looked at it from a shareholder standpoint, there's a simple answer. Business goes down, so do benefits, so do comp, goodbye employees. When the business is ready to go back up, you bring back in the employees, but not if you're going to follow this Business Roundtable. And this was produced by people coming into Davos, or a very impressive list of CEOs who said, we as CEOs must mandate that companies take a much wider perspective on what they do and pay attention to more than just shareholder interest, not excluding shareholder interest by any means, but not just shareholder interest. And so again, are we obligated to upskill people for the new world? What about all of this issue in the United States and maybe in other parts of the world, and social unrest where you are, about diversity? I think you've got issues having to do with gender issues. We've got all the issues. We've got every which kind of group, diversity group has said we are marginalized. We're not treated well, and that can't be the case going forward. So I conclude this opening section by saying there are many issues then for a leader in a VUCA world. And then I'm going to give you some examples of those that handle it well and those that handle it poorly. First of all, the classic issue is every day you have the issue of, do I deal with just the immediate fires, or do I deal with the longer term issues, the urgent versus the important? We all know the answer to that. If push comes to shove, the urgent always wins, and we leave on delay the important, the longer term. Well, the urgent is so urgent during the pandemic. There were so many decisions that had to be made so quickly. But we recognize that you can't run a business simply on short term. You have to have a broader view. And that's a lot of what I think, the leader has to balance. Second of all, how do you plan? How do you forecast? Very much more difficult. When is this pandemic going to end? If anybody on this Zoom call knows the answer, be sure you chat the answer to me. And if you have a specific date, I would really appreciate it, because I'd like to book a plane to Chile and get to see all of you face to face. So please, if you have that answer, but in case you don't have that answer, good luck planning in your business, forecasting in your business. How many of you had forecasts for this year that looked anything like what happened. Now, there were strategy people in the last few years who said, given the VUCA world, forget about forecasts more than a year out, even more than 6 months out. The world is so disruptive and so turbulent, you can't do that. So in the face of that, leaders, you better be paying attention. This is sort of the challenge to how you communicate, but you don't have all the information you once did. You really have to show compassion for every person. We're not psychologists. Is that what we're supposed to do? And yet people are hurting. They're hurting. Their lives have been decimated in all of this. What are your contingency plans? Back in surviving, thriving, this market, that market, shipping, not shipping, getting, how manufacturing, how is all this going to work? And what is a corporate culture when people are all working from home? What does that concept even mean for a leader? How do you create the glue of people having an identity with an organization when all you're looking at, remember the picture of me, slide 2, is a computer screen all day? Not an office, not other people, not other interactions in a meeting room, a computer screen. Is that a corporate culture? And then how do you collaborate across all that? And wow, are we tired? This is exhausting. It's exhausting for us. It's exhausting for other people. And we have to meet all these constituents who say, me, me, me. Don't forget about me. I'm assuming you got the challenge point. You got the challenge point. We are very challenged as leaders. Now, I want to go to some examples and be able to showcase to you what are some contrasting sort of data points about how to handle this, and then draw some conclusions from that. Juan Jose, are there any chats or anything else I need to address at this point, or can I push on?
No, you can move forward.
I'm going forward. All right. So I don't have a full analysis. Chile, Juan Jose, and George kindly sent me some background materials, but I understand you've been through some rough times. And I don't know which one of these words in Spanish would be the right word to describe the hell of downsizing and layoffs and restructuring and all of that, but you get the point here. It's not an easy part of business. I used to give a talk and I'd say it's a lot more enjoyable to do growth than it is to do downsizing. Just
they're all very relevant. They are very relevant for the Chilean context. Yeah.
So none of these, if that's true, George, none of these are happy terms. Nobody enjoys doing this. You'd much rather be growing and developing, but that's the world that we're in. And the world that we're in I've got two pieces of data here. One is US and one is worldwide. They all make the same point. Most industries are going down. The percentages can differ in terms of the impact, but basically in terms of layoffs, which is a surrogate of the business results, there are so many businesses that are suffering at this point in so many different industries. There are some that actually have done well, but it's a minority, and for the purposes of this conversation, that's not what I'm.
Professor, in order to give you context about the Chilean situation, we're heading up to 2 million unemployed people here in Chile out of a 10 million people workforce. So we're heading to a 20%. So it's very relevant what you're talking about.
It's very nice, Juan Jose, to actually get honest data. We don't get as much honest data in the United States. We get all hopes. So when you say it's 20% unemployment,
we're heading in that direction. Not only the unemployed, but people that left the workforce, especially the gender gap. That there are mothers that can rejoin the workforce even if they had the opportunity because of what's happening. So it's so we already surpassed the 12%, and we're heading to in that direction to the 20%.
So the social impacts, the macroeconomic impacts, the whole identity of a nation, and what we do to help our people. I mean, so many of these large issues are confronting so many countries, and I'm not going to speak to that aspect of it directly, but obviously those people became unemployed in part because the businesses removed them from the business. And I'm going to discuss how they got removed and the impact of that. But there are other impacts, obviously, all sorts of social ills that occur with that many people unemployed. I got a kick out of this one last week. It came that, LinkedIn, I'm sure everybody's kind of familiar with LinkedIn. LinkedIn's starting to get rid of people. I thought, well, people are looking for jobs. People want to network. LinkedIn should be alive and well, but LinkedIn is cutting back people. So even LinkedIn is cutting back people. And for those of you who are in the States, just an iconic example, I don't know if you heard of the company Brooks Brothers. It's sort of the famous store in the United States that sells shirts like I'm wearing and ties like I'm wearing. I mean, something very, professional. By the way, I just rented this for all of you today because I've been wearing t-shirts and shorts all summer. And I won't tell you when I was teaching the students in the spring what I was wearing. But for out of respect for my South American brothers and sisters, I got dressed up. I don't want extra points, but I want to have that acknowledged. And I would have bought it from Brooks Brothers. 1818, the place was founded. And now it's boarded up. It's finished. It's got a bankruptcy sale. Now that's, business, destructive capitalism. It occurs, ups and downs. I mean, that's part of economies. And, the capitalists will say that, if it goes down, it will then, have a force that will bring it back up. And so maybe in the end, this is just part of the ebb and flow of business. Obviously, many businesses die over time. They seem to be dying more frequently, even before the pandemic. But now we've had many, many renowned businesses that have said they can't exist. I mean, we're not wearing shirts and ties now, if that's your wardrobe, and they're predicting we may be working from home for quite a while. So how are they going to do a business? But that's not why I put this here. Reason I put this here is they've had very loyal employees to the brand, not just loyal customers, but loyal employees. And they made a big statement that they wanted some of their factories in the United States. The whole controversy of, do you manufacture in your own country or do you global source, et cetera. Except that after they made a big pronouncement of how important it was to do business in the United States, their factory was closed outside Boston, a place called Haverhill, Massachusetts. And this says the CEO used to be, well regarded. He used to come to every year for the Christmas party and talk the big game. We're made in America. It's a wonderful company, and this and that. Now he's more like Ebenezer Scrooge. I don't know if you know that character, but that's the anti-Christmas. It's the person who's not very giving to people because they denied severance to the employees who were laid off. So again, what are you doing to do it? Now you might say, okay, look, the business is out of business. Nobody's buying shirts and ties. What do you want from them? They can't. They're out of money anyway, so they can't give to the employees. But it makes a big difference in terms of if they were bought by someone and they come back. If there is some sense of what was sort of the understanding we had. What is the loyalty of a company to its employees? Because these people actually converted that factory from a factory making shirts and ties to making masks. It's been making masks for the American public for the last 4 months. And that was to their credit. And they came in the pandemic to the factory and made masks. And what are they getting as a thank you? Pushed out the door, no severance. Doesn't seem like a very, very progressive or humane action. So that's going to be my punchline for this section, which is that it's not fun doing downsizing. And obviously part of downsizing is part of doing business. It just happens. But how you handle it is something you can control. And it can be handled in ways where you can ease the stresses, the burdens, and increase the loyalty and goodwill, or it can be done in a way that makes it much more difficult. And it's much more costly and sacrifices employee goodwill. And that's my field of interest, that it is a lousy situation, a challenging situation, a complicated situation for leaders, but in a way, leaders are ever more needed and are ever more valuable if they can rise to the occasion. And so what I want to do is show you 2 examples in great detail. And I'll read them quickly because I don't want to run out of time here on this, but I think I wanted to read the detail of them because it makes my point about this slide. How it's done matters a lot, and it's a choice that you have. It's not a given how you do downsizing. It may be a given that you have to downsize, but how you do it is up to you. By the way, there are some who say it's not a given you have to downsize. There are other kind of solutions that could be done. That's another question of what could you do to avoid layoffs. Some companies have asked everybody to take a 10% salary cut, treat it as a loan to the company, and everybody's jobs are preserved. There are other techniques, but if you are laying off, then then that's how you do it. I don't know that you've seen a lot of this, but we have in the States. We've seen layoffs done often through Zoom calls. in which people are announced to be laid off. That is in and of itself a mind crazy thought, that everything about how you would do this, if you read any textbook about best practices about how to do layoffs, obviously nobody would have ever talked about Zoom and doing it through some kind of electronic means like that. So whether it be a phone call or an email or a Zoom, it's not in person. And I think all of you have had that circumstance that layoffs have not been in person. So what I want to show you is, if this is a common phenomenon, these two examples that to me are a perfect pairing of good and bad. Bird Scooter is on the left, and I'm going to tell you about Bird Scooter. That's the bad example. And then Airbnb. I understand you've got scooters in Chile and you have Bird as a brand, so you know about this. They were very popular, but obviously there wasn't too much scootering when people were sheltering in place. So their business fell apart. Airbnb, you got to get on an airplane, you got to go into someone else's home. Also, for very good reasons, not really a very viable business through this. Now what I want to do is tell you exactly the detail of how each of these companies announced the layoffs to their people. Let's start with Bird Scooter. Now I'm going to read this, or highlights of it. I know there's a lot on this slide, but just sit back and enjoy this story, although this story is not enjoyable. But just listen to this. At 10:30 a.m., employees logged onto their Zoom, but were greeted only by a cracking silence. Meetings at Birds were usually punctual. They're usually punctual. So this is a meeting, they don't know, they were called to a meeting, they don't know what it's about, and it was starting late. Not a good sign. Is there audio? Why can't I hear anything? Someone says, we never start late. This is strange, something feels off. For the next 5 minutes, employees stared at a sparse slide with a dark gray background that only said COVID-19. Okay, are all of you with me? Imagine you're just looking at a blank slide. It says COVID-19. You don't know what's coming after that. It was not our brand color or font. It was unsettling. Maybe thinking there were technical difficulties, some employees logged off. Said, I guess it's not working today. I guess there's not a conference. And we're never able to return to the meeting. But after 5 minutes of dead air, a robotic sounding disembodied voice, if you understand that, just understand, not a very appealing voice, comes on like a robot on the Zoom. I hope you're with me so far, because that is not a good opening. It gets worse. The woman of the voice began by acknowledging this is a suboptimal way to deliver this message. First of all, who says suboptimal way? In business school, we say that. We spend a lot of time using jargon. But we do not say that to people that are stressed that this is suboptimal. There's got to be a better way to say it. Then she says, COVID has had a massive impact on our business, one that has forced our team and our board of directors to make difficult, painful decisions. One of these decisions is to eliminate a number of roles at the company. Unfortunately, your role is impacted by the decision. Okay, now you got my attention. Now we got something coming. The meeting was scheduled for a half hour, but ended up going only for 2 minutes. Towards the end of the monologue, as the woman started talking about the future of Bird, she sounded like she was getting choked up and was trying to hold back tears. But no one knew who she was. No one recognized her voice. And they're still wondering who she was, but they knew this. It wasn't the male CEO. It was somebody they didn't even know. And then the screen went dark. Their MacBooks the company issued, their MacBooks restarted. And by 10:40, meeting started, remember, 10:30, 5-minute delay. 5 minutes later, that's it. Everyone was locked out. They couldn't get on their computers anymore. Finito, finished. Then later comes the CEO who had been silent. And he says, no, we did not let go employees via a pre-recording. It was via a live Zoom meeting, not ideal because we're working from home. The video was turned off, which we thought was more humane. In retrospect, we should have made one-on-one calls to the hundreds impacted over the course of a few days. Professor Jick's punchline, I guess we didn't give a lot of thought to the planning of this because we didn't really consider, kind of all these elements. Then there's sort of a company statement. We purposefully and intentionally did not have any video, and they sort of justify what they're doing. Okay, now comes Bird employees were highly disheartened by how coldly Bird handled these reductions. Of course, lots of companies have to lay off people now, one of the employees said. People will recognize the companies, however, that do it well and the ones that didn't. And I had hoped Bird is the one, I hope now Bird is the one that is remembered as one who did it poorly. Now, I'm going to tell you why they're remembered for doing it poorly. I received emails galore from current students and past students, all sending me this and saying, hey, Jick, have you seen this? And can you believe this? They obviously didn't take your course. This is how not to do it. And sometimes it's hard to believe that people could make so many mistakes. Now, we can argue, you know, it's difficult doing this and what really could they have done, et cetera. Now we're going to show you what they could have done. Because now I'm going to switch to Airbnb. And the contrast is going to be obvious. And I want to make this contrast and then try and wrap up with what this all means. Here's Airbnb. Okay, again, same conditions, a business model that's disrupted. They can't keep their employees. This is now the CEO speaking. And here's a transcript. This is my 7th time talking to you from my house. Remember, the other guy didn't talk to them at all. Each time we've talked, I've shared good news and bad news. But today I have to share some very sad news. When you've asked me about layoffs, I've said nothing is off the table. So the guy was honest. He said, you know, I don't know. We may have to do layoffs. Today, I have to confirm we are reducing the size of the Airbnb workforce. And for a company like us, whose mission is centered around belonging, this is incredibly difficult to confront. And it will be even harder for those who have to leave Airbnb. I'm going to share as many details as I can on how I arrived at this decision and what we are doing for those leaving and what will happen next. This is not a 2-minute call by a woman who nobody knows with a voice that nobody recognizes, giving the kind of hard information and then saying arrivederci and then closing off their computers. Okay, totally different. Let me start with how we arrived at the decision. We're collectively living through this crisis, and obviously global travel is not happening. Out of our 7,500 Airbnb employees, nearly 1,900 will have to leave Airbnb. So that is a big number. This is not a little on the edges, comprising 25% of our company. Since we cannot afford to do everything we used to, these cuts had to be mapped to a more focused business. Travel is going to look different. We'll need to evolve our model. This means we'll need to reduce our investment in certain activities. These decisions, however, are not a reflection of the work from people on these teams, and it does not mean everyone on these teams will be leaving us, but many people across Airbnb will be impacted. Many teams will be reduced in size. You feel the tone is different. You feel the honesty through it. You feel that, you know, you're talking to someone, there's a human being there. You just feel the contrast. To me, it's so obvious. By the way, I had twice as many emails come to me with this example. Current students and past students saying, hey, Jick, did you see this? I think they did take your course. I think this one they listened to. It's important that we had a clear set of principles guided by our core values. So what the decisions we're going to make have a logic, and the logic is the kind of values and principles we set out together. And they were, and then he lists them out. Be sure whatever we do fits our strategy. Do as much as we can for those who are impacted. Totally different than Bird, which says arrivederci. Be unwavering in our commitment to diversity. So even as we're leaving, people are leaving, understand that we don't want to have this be unequal in who leaves. Do this through one-on-one communication and wait to communicate any decisions until all details are landed. Transparency of only partial information can make matters worse, and I've done my best to stay true to these principles. What a difference. Viva la différence between the first one and the second one. And he goes on to sort of lay out the details. I want to provide clarity to you as soon as possible. We have employees here. I'll quickly go through this. We have tried to be thoughtful in planning. All right. We had none of that in Bird, no thoughtfulness. Now, by the way, Airbnb had no more time to prepare for this than Bird, meaning it's not a question of, was this urgent and did you have to make something, you know, kind of a difficult decision? It's a VUCA world for both of them, but one of them was thoughtful and one of them wasn't. And this says, you know, for those who are leaving, it was important to us that whatever we could do, we're going to inform people in a personal one-on-one conversation, you know, not through Zoom. And here's the deal. For your final day would be May 11th. On a Monday, we felt Monday would give people time to begin taking next steps and saying goodbye. We understand and respect how important that is. So again, trying to be respectful of the people, might be easier for them in a difficult condition to ease some of the tremendous stress, not to take it away, but to ease it in some way. Whoops. And then he says, and to those of you that are staying, one of the most important ways we can honor those who are leaving is for them to know that their contributions matter. So tell them that their contributions matter and that they will always be part of Airbnb's story. I'm confident their work will live on just like this mission will live on. And to those leaving, I am truly sorry. Please know this is not your fault. The world will never stop seeking the qualities and talents that you brought to Airbnb that helped make Airbnb. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm just going to say to all of you, because you're all smart and this is sort of obvious, these are my two prototypical examples. You couldn't find, more of a difference than these two. And I have seen many more like Bird than I have Airbnb. I've sort of tracked companies doing this, and I see many more Birds than Airbnb, and that's concerning to me about what my last remarks, which will be about the future, because the legacy, the impact of these different actions is significant. If you do it the Airbnb way, you create goodwill. You have sustained loyalty. You build brand support. You have a lot of positives. If you do it the Bird way, you're going to lose that, because all of this is visible. It's visible today because social media puts it all out, because unions talk about it, or employees talk about it with their friends and families, even on Zoom. So this is all visible, and the brand will be tainted. And people are asking, well, what? I thought we had a deal. I thought we had an arrangement. I thought we had values. Well, Bird's values were violated. Airbnb's were vindicated, validated. What if the business comes back? Well, I want to go work there. I'm going to want to go back to Airbnb. I'm not going to want to go back to Bird. As they said, it's a Black Mirror episode. It's terrible. And am I going to buy products from Bird versus some other scooter company when we can go back outside? Unlikely, because this article about Bird was everywhere. And finally, what does it say about these big plaques that companies have about our corporate values if we're not walking the talk? Conversely, if we are, then they were meaningful. So those are my data points. I could have done this with charts and studies and this and that. I wanted to read you the actual descriptions of what happened in each of those cases. So let me close with some remarks about the future. I've got 5 or 6 slides, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. Essentially, I've already sort of said to you, there is a choice point. Despite being a VUCA world, we as leaders can make choices. We have certain things within our control. And I think it's important in showing those 2 examples to have sort of demonstrated that. And there are 2 aspects of the way in which we can do this well or better. One is, if we have to make the painful changes, and again, I understand that where you are, there have been many painful changes that have been made and maybe more that will. We don't know when this is all going to end. Pay close attention to how things are implemented, showing people respect and compassion, giving employees some agency, some aspects of this that they can choose, not choose whether they keep their job or not, but when they might be let go and what the conditions are, and a variety of things that some of that can be negotiable, and exhibiting fair and generous supports. That's all about, if you have to make the painful decisions, how you go about it will make the difference. Airbnb versus Bird. Second of all, when we make our way out of just surviving through this and beginning the recovery through this, then there is this third and final phase about reimagining and reinventing. And if we've created goodwill, if we've handled this better than not, then our ability to kind of turn forward and rebuild and reinvent is much more likely to happen. If we have given away all our goodwill and social capital, then the ability to mobilize people and motivate people to help is not there. And there is some very interesting work to be done as a leader about making this horrible tragedy into something that we can at least have some good stuff come out of it. And the good stuff is challenging some of the sacred cows. Do we need the same amount of real estate? Challenging, strengthening the intangibles of a culture when a culture has been atomized through a situation like this. So the 2 pieces of handling the pain better and answering these questions affirmatively. Were departing employees treated fairly? Hopefully, yes. Were people provided some agency? Hopefully, yes. Did the company make a good faith effort to support them? Hopefully, yes. All of that is on the pain side. On the future side, have you begun to sort of turn your attention to what is going to be our model? Are we going to have remote working, hybrid working, some remote, some present? How do we work? How do we create or preserve? How do we preserve and enhance our culture in a post-pandemic world? Maybe we need to rethink performance evaluation. We haven't been evaluating people in the same way as we did before, and maybe to our benefit. We learned some things about trusting people and evaluating people. And how do we sustain some of the upgraded leadership skills that hopefully have been demonstrated, where we've been more communicative and more compassionate, more collaborative? Let's not slide back after the pandemic, and begin to again turn our attention to medium and long term, beyond obviously the urgent issues. So turn this moment of crisis into something that is more positive. Look in the mirror, raise your own leadership game, and begin to leverage and build out social capital that you can utilize in this final stage. And lastly, some companies, many that I'm reading about, almost every industry, are reevaluating their entire business model. That's never a bad thing, because again, business models are not, as my subject of change suggests, are not something that are forever. They're something that have to be constantly reevaluated. So my last thought to you is that you as leaders personally have a job to do, and hopefully you're doing that job. And you're doing it by over-communicating and delivering messages personally and getting help that you need to be able to come up with better approaches here, and taking care of your own stress and making the decisions that are within your control. That's what we can do. What we don't want to do is overcommit, make big empty promises. Don't say things like, I feel your pain, or this is really hard for me. You can't feel their pain. Nobody knows what their pain is. And it's hard for you. It's not about you. It's about them. And don't give this to the third-party woman at Bird who gave this announcement, who nobody knew. You made the decisions. You be in there front and center delivering them. And don't act as if you have all the answers. Nobody does through this whole period. And certainly don't make believe that you're sort of a victim. I close with a set of good wishes to you in making leadership choices that will rise to the occasion, and that will give you better opportunities for a better future coming out of a lousy period. And hopefully both what's going on in the United States and South America will be something we'll tell our grandchildren, but will be a past chapter, and we have something we can talk more proudly about in terms of a future. Thank you all for listening. And Juan Jose, I'm going to turn it to you for questions. I overdid my time a few minutes, but I want to hear any questions that people have.
So thank you very much, Professor Jick. Your presentation was very insightful and very relevant for the Chilean context. So I would like to invite all the attendees, if you want to send any question to Professor Jick, you can do it through the chat window, and I can pass it through to Professor. So I'll start with my own questions. After seeing your presentation, we have clearly sized all the challenges and the problems, let's say the baggage that comes with COVID and with all what's happening, all the negative aspects. But can you talk about the opportunities that arise with all this change?
Well, the first and foremost one that I've heard from my clients is that there's been much more humanity evidence through this. We're all speaking on Zoom. I presume most, if not all of you, are in your homes. None of us have had most of us don't get the chance to communicate with people looking at their homes. Juan Jose, I like the painting behind you there. You know, I mean, you don't see people's homes. You know, kids are going by, and it's opened up a humanity between people, between companies and their clients and their customers, between employees. So one piece of this is, I think we've kind of all through the suffering of this, realized we're all in this together and opened ourselves up more. That is, I think, a better way to kind of build relationships in the future. The second is, it's forced us to examine our business model. Obviously, we didn't forecast any of these, and so the conditions have changed, but then we have to ask, what are some new opportunities that might arise? So second positive, our business models. And the third, it seems to me, is sort of in your management practices, that a lot of the ways in which we created hierarchies to manage people, everybody's having supervisors, we don't trust them. Now, there are examples, by the way, of companies that have created software to go into people's homes to examine how much time during the day they're basically Googling, they're kind of surfing versus really doing work. That shows a low trust. But what I've heard is more the opposite. is that we don't actually have to check on people. People are just doing their work, and they're very responsible. So we're willing to entrust people in a way that we never did before. I think that'll be positive. If you give people that trust, you'll get it back much more significantly. So all three of those factors, more humanity, more openness to challenging sacred cow business models. And I think, again, something about the way in which we manage, that now we can open ourselves up to new possibilities of a more positive nature.
In connecting to what you said, there's a very interesting question here in the chat. Christian Guardia says, so how can COVID be a way to empower employees? Does all the leadership has to come top down, or can this situation promote kind of a bottom up leadership or an employee empowerment?
So the course that you took, Juan Jose, with me, that dealt with sort of the VUCA question, made a big point about the fact that organizations, global organizations, and also organizations that respect the brains of people, can't operate in the old-fashioned sort of hierarchical way and really be successful in a fast-changing world. You need the inputs of people. You need the agility and the insights that people can give you. And I think in a way, the COVID challenge, which again is VUCA cubed, opens up even more possibilities that way. Because again, as I say, you can't do the same kind of old-fashioned supervision in this model. You have to entrust. And if it's been validated or vindicated through the way in which people are behaving, I really think that we'll see sort of new models of the way in which we're going to manage, as I said a moment ago. So I'm sort of more hopeful that this will allow us, hopefully, when we return to normal work, which is still a big question, that we'll change some of our assumptions and we'll challenge some of the sacred cows, and there'll be some positive coming out of that. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, definitely. So Magdalena asked, how does the corporation can manage the pressure put on the employees? How do you face burning out? People are working long hours at home. It's hard to put like an end to the workday because you keep receiving emails and everybody's working the whole day. How should corporation manage all the workload?
So that's a big issue. I'll comment on that, but I see somebody just chatted about being London Business School alumni. I would like to say hello to London Business School alumni because I taught at LBS for a year, loved my time in London. So I didn't know that you were you were part of this. And so greetings to LBS alumni. I mean, again, my loyalties now have shifted entirely to CBS, but I want to recognize my heritage. Employee burnout is a big issue. You've sort of indicated a lot of the dimensions. In the beginning, everybody, just sort of had to adjust. And then they said, what does that adjustment mean? My boss thinks I'm available 24/7. And that's not sustainable. My kids are right around me and there are all sorts of distractions. Because so much is going on in my personal life I have to manage, and in my professional life, I'm exhausted. So there are interesting new models coming out that are actually they're basically encouraging companies to give people, for example, a 4-day week. Try and maybe give people a defined day off. Because again, otherwise it's a 7-day week. And that's really not sustainable. The second thing is to actually establish in a kind of normative way that we don't have the latitude to kind of, call on people 24/7. When it comes to the day is over at 7 p.m., the day is over. It's no more, kind of email expectations from 7 p.m. on. So the more progressive companies that once preached about a balance between work life and personal life, this has been very, very much tested, as your question suggests, in this situation. So one is to acknowledge that burnout is an issue. Two is there are some mitigators. There are some mitigators for this. And that's sort of establishing boundaries and ways in which, again, you respect that. Because one of the other things that people discovered is it's not about, do I have to be at my computer 18 hours a day in order to show I'm productive? You can be productive in many other ways, and you can work in different hours of the day because, again, you don't have any commuting time. You just save yourself all those friction costs. But allow people the latitude to do that, and where they need to turn off or play a game with their kids or whatever it is, don't treat that as they're lazy or not doing their work. Treat that as understandable in this condition. So I'm giving a progressive answer. I know many companies are not doing that way, and therefore people are burning out, and that will become an issue because by definition, it's going to basically create lower productivity in the end.
So Professor, you're also an expert in stakeholder management. I remember when you told us about your experience working with Major Bloomberg on the 9/11 memorial and putting together all these different people with different point of views and interests. Nowadays, companies have to take tough decisions. Laying off people is very tough, and there are different players affected in this decision and that have a say. So how should corporations deal with the stakeholder management, taking care of the shareholders' interests, employees? Here in Chile, we have a much stronger unions than in the US.
Yes.
So how can you deal with that? And how should CEOs or the top management of the companies bring together all these views and try to be on the same boat, despite sometimes this tough decision confront the different parts of a company?
So, you know, when a speaker says that's a really good question, that's a sign that that's not I don't have a very good answer, but I really like the question. So that was a very good question. And it's a very good question because it recognizes that it's complex, dealing with many different interests, and those interests are often at odds with each other. And you're right, adding the union to the mix for all of you is a reminder again of a very strong, I assume a pretty strong stakeholder, you know, in the mix. You know, add to that, you know, customers. I mean, customers, you know, are raising all sorts of questions about how companies, you know, the travel companies that are not giving people refunds on their reservations, or they're all over social media. So whether it be through social media or through friends or whatever, the saying bad things about a company is going to be problematic. So that's the first point. Second point is to acknowledge that because there is a complex mix of these interests, it is by definition going to be a balancing act, and you won't be able to satisfy all of the interests all of the time. So part of it is being transparent about that. You know, we have many pieces to this puzzle that we have to put together. And I'm big on actually at times bringing some of the different stakeholder interests into the same room, so to speak, and trying to together fashion a solution. So instead of you always, a hub and spoke model in which you're always having to solve everybody else's issue, do some of that collectively and bring some of the groupings together and try and solve it. So that accomplishes one, probably a more creative problem solving model. And the second is part of what stakeholders want is to be acknowledged that they are valued as a stakeholder, that they are important in the mix. And the way in which you acknowledge that is you involve them in some way. So that doesn't solve their interest issue, whatever is the agenda they want to put forward. But if you don't acknowledge them and you don't involve them, they're likely to be more resistant. And that was one of the things that I've taught for many years, that how you handle the change, how you handle stakeholders will determine their position, will influence their position. They can become more resistant or more receptive depending again on how you handle them. So I'm big on how you handle them as a way to try and solve the complexity of interest that is understandably a challenge.
Professor Jick, we're right on time. Before letting the attendance into the meeting, we were talking about the bad practices of Latin American culture, that we were always late. So we're trying to make some changes to our culture, and we're going to end on time. We really appreciate your time, all your insights, and all the time that you invested preparing this presentation for us and sharing your thoughts. It's very insightful, and we really appreciate it. Todd Jick, thank you very much. I hope we stay in touch and that the next time we can have this presentation here in Chile in person and in Spanish. So
and in Spanish,
you have to work out your Spanish.
And with Chilean food.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Definitely. So everybody always tells me you must come to Chile for the food. So I'm going to come for the food. Juan Jose, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you and George for inviting me. Thank all of you for making the time. I know that, again, in this crazy world, you know, we have all sorts of demands on our time. I appreciate everybody making the time. Please feel free to reach out if there's something you want to follow up on. But thank you for the interest in this. And I do hope I'll have the opportunity to meet one day face to face. Thanks very much for being here with me.
Thank you very
Jose,
much.
Professor
Have a great
Jick,
day.
thank you very much for your time. It really brings me back. I feel nostalgic now of remembering your classes back at CBS. So thank you it's always very valuable to get these refreshments from now and then. So thank you very much for participating with us on behalf of all the different organizations that were participating in this event. So thank you everyone again. And please stay tuned as we will be inviting you and letting you know of future events of the Global Center, of the Columbia Business School Alumni Club, as well as other alumni clubs that we work together, such as London Business School and MIT. So thank you to everyone, and have a nice day.